Hello, and welcome to the Fulcrum podcast, where we find the balance or fall off a seesaw train. Today on the show, we have Sam Connolly. Sam wears many hats: risk investigator, software quality advocate, finance coach, and staunch critic of gendered advertising. I invited Sam onto the show to talk about her finance coaching hat. Specifically, how can we balance sensible habits like the future with enjoying the present moment with the resources that we have? Sam, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I guess before we get into the big question, I'd like to talk a little bit more about your origin story, about how you found this new position in finance. We first met when we were both in the software testing / quality assurance / quality assistance. It was called a bunch of different things back then. Maybe you could tell the listeners a little bit more about how you moved from software testing to risk investigator to this finance coach hat at the moment.
When I first moved to Sydney, I actually grew up in Tasmania. So I grew up in a relatively poor family, and we never learnt about financial literacy. We always had the mindset of if you get money, you spend money because it's never going to last. It's never going to stick around. And we were often living paycheck to paycheck. As I was going through high school and uni, there was only a couple of times I was able to save up for big things like trip to Japan with high school. I actually got a part-time job to start saving for that, or going on exchange to Europe for a year. I was able to get enough money to put that aside. But when I first moved to Sydney about 10 years ago, I didn't really know how to save for long-term wealth. Sydney is a very expensive city. For my early 20s, I got myself into about 35K of credit card debt from just enjoying the lifestyle in Sydney and spending a little too much and not really reining in spendings. This was a problem coming into my late 20s, early 30s. I started learning about budgeting. I also got some software testing roles in the superannuation industry and started learning about retirement funds. From work, I started doing a deep dive into learning about all these different ways to save for long-term wealth. And that started the ball rolling, and I focused on paying down that debt. I was starting to grow my career as well, so I was starting to get paid more. Went through a phase of what if, imagine I lost my job, how would I cut down my budget? So I tried to go back to my poor student living days type of budget to help pay down that debt. And then during the pandemic, there was a lack of tech events to go to after work. So because of all networking events dried up, one of the things I wanted to do was get a financial advice degree. So I started studying a new degree, and over the next 2 to 3 years, got that degree. And I'm now considering a career change into financial advice because I think helping people work towards financial freedom would be a bit more fulfilling than helping companies with their test strategies, technical solutions, or whatnot. So at the moment, I'm still a little bit in between. I can do the financial coaching because I don't have a license to practice advice. I would actually have to intern under another advisor at least for about 12 months. But I've got the degree, and we can talk about general financial literacy. I just have to draw the line. This is not financial advice. But that line is really when it comes to talking about specific products. So if someone's saying, look, you should invest in XYZ for these reasons, that is financial advice. And if you're not licensed, that is potentially will get you in trouble with ASIC if it is a recorded conversation like this.
Just to recap on your journey to make sure I've understood it correctly. So you started out with a fairly low socioeconomic status, and you moved to Sydney and realized how difficult it is to stretch a dollar here. And so you kind of hunkered down. You said you were doing your university here, was it? Or was it in Tasmania?
No,
In
I did
Sydney?
my first degree. My first degree was in Tasmania.
It's in Tasmania. Okay. So you moved here when you started working. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
at the age of 22.
And so, yeah, I can imagine when you're in your early 20s, you still want to have fun. And, late 20-year-old Sam or early 30-year-old Sam, or even beyond that, is kind of a distant stranger. So it's quite difficult to build that saving discipline or that investing discipline. And then through work, you started finding out about some more long-term wealth building strategies. Was that at Tyro or was it a different place?
No, the first one was at Challenger. I
Okay.
had a 6-month contract at Challenger, and Challenger provide annuities. It's a retirement product, but it's basically fixed income for the rest of your life. One of the issues with your retirement funds is you don't know how long you're going to live. But if you just want to invest a certain amount and get, say $50,000 a year until the day you die, these companies will take on that risk. And then by providing enough of these products, they can kind of average out that risk across enough people. So instead of you having to manage when you might run out of money and just trying to take away that stress from people, you can buy something called an annuity, which is fixed income. I have a wealth building flowchart that I've made.
Excellent. Wonderful.
Yeah, so if you're looking to build wealth for the long term,
Yeah.
this wealth building flowchart is built off the personal finance Reddit communities and has been adjusted for the Australian market. You can break it down into like a 6-step process where generally you need to have like step one or ground zero. You have to have a really good understanding of like what does it cost to be you? Like, how much does it cost for you to have like a half decent lifestyle that you enjoy? If you don't have any information about how much it costs to be you, it's really hard to have a look through some of the other parts of the process. It's also something that you can work on over time. You don't need to have like a perfectly clear idea of what that value is today, but it's a good starting point. And then going through the process of paying for essentials, slowly building up that emergency fund. If you've got any debt, there's a couple of different approaches to paying down debt, either a domino or an avalanche method, depending on the size of the debt and the interest rate. I personally like the domino effect to debt, where you focus on paying down the smallest amount of debt first, regardless of what the interest rate is, because mentally that can give you a quick win. If you can see that you can pay off your $500 payday loan or everyday pay or small credit cards, that could give you the mental energy to stick it out and tackle those bigger debts. Whereas mathematically speaking, the most optimum thing to do in terms of reducing the amount of general interest paid is using the avalanche method where you pay down the highest interest debt first. But from a money psychology point of view, I think the domino method can help a lot of people feel like they're progressing towards hitting some of those big goals. Then the next part of the conversation is like, do you want to own a home? And going through the process of maybe building up a deposit, maybe utilizing first home savers via super, or trying to save for other big expenses. Once you do have that home loan set up, you can research methods like just adding extra into offset. That's a pretty low risk place to put your money and it will continue to work for you. But you can also do things like debt recycling, where you can convert part of that loan into tax deductible debt and then start maximizing superannuation, the tax savings there. And if you want to invest for other long-term wealth outside of super, passive investing or broad-based index funds, or if you want to go down the investment property route, you do have to do a decent amount of research into that. And then it's just building up that general wealth portfolio. There's a general rule called the 4% rule in the financial independence retire early movement, that if you have enough saved up that you can draw down 4% of your portfolio to cover your daily living costs, that type of portfolio has a very low chance of running out after about 30 years. So that's if you flip that around 25 times your annual expenses. So if you need 100K a year to live a comfortable life, you would need $2.5 million in a broad portfolio that you can use to draw down that general amount. And then it's enjoy your best life. Money is a tool to help us enjoy life. We can't use it when we're dead. And acknowledging that money is a social construct that we give value to, I think was really important for me as part of my journey as well. Society tells us you should always be building wealth, you should always be saving more, investing more, but that doesn't acknowledge what you're trying to build wealth for. It's not really useful just to maximize big dollar net wealth if you've got no idea how you're actually going to use that, how it's going to help you live. So I think it's very easy to get into that savers mindset or the I'm going to invest every single spare dollar. And when people get to that early retirement phase and they're like, oh yeah, I'm starting to cut back on work, they haven't really focused on what brings them joy as a person or what they're going to spend their time on. But again, this comes down to more of the psychology of money rather than the concept of money itself.
Mm. So there's probably a lot to chew on in that. I think when I think about a lot of the challenges when it comes to money, I think about one is that cycle that's hard to break where if you're not used to having money or saving money or investing money, it kind of just goes as easy as it comes, right? You might have told yourself a story that money, like money and me don't stick together, or like I don't attract money or something like that. And so it becomes quite easy to see money as this ephemeral thing that you don't store and you don't invest and you don't save. Have you, I guess you might have come across this in your own journey as well. And it seems like it's quite fortunate that you arrived at a place where you worked that kind of gave you like a little bit of a gateway drug into the world of personal finance. But for someone that perhaps didn't have that doesn't have that serendipity, like what would you tell them in order to break that cycle?
I prepared a bunch of workshop material for work colleagues a few weeks ago, and it was just to go through that general journey. Mentally, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can think about how your money comes in. If anyone's read Barefoot Investor, I feel like that's a good starting point. And Barefoot Investor uses this kind of tap and bucket approach, where if you imagine all of your different income streams coming into one big bucket, and then you can distribute that bucket to different categories. One of the other approaches is if you've got that idea of how much it costs to be you roughly per pay cycle, is that you can go, okay, it costs me 5K a month to generally enjoy life. I'm going to put that 5K into my regular spendings account. I'm going to pay myself first. I'm going to make sure I've got enough money to live. And then the rest goes into some sort of investment or savings. And then you try not to touch that unless it's a real emergency. Trying to practice that discipline because I found one of the problems I had when I was going through my 20s was like I'd get paid. I'm like, oh, it's a big number in my bank account. And every pay cycle, all of that would get paid, all of that would get spent, plus a little bit extra on the credit card.
Yeah.
And that's what led to that credit card debt over time. So, changing that mindset, if it is using a bucket approach or a pay yourself first type of approach, might be a way to start trying to break that habit. But you also have to be kind on yourself as part of that journey. I don't remember how many times I had a professional, a counselor, give me a spreadsheet for a budget, and I would always do the numbers. And I'm like, look, I can save or invest $500 a month or this whatever amount per pay cycle, and then I would never do it.
Yeah.
But I would always beat myself up. I'd be like, oh, I'm such a failure because I can't save this basic amount of money per month. Why am I drowning in credit card debt when I'm a smart person? So you also have to be kind to yourself and try to meet yourself where you are in that moment so that it also, you're trying to reduce that mental health stress over that period as well. Another thing that people might tend to do is maybe external accountability. I've heard of some people like they'll do the pay myself approach first, but when they invest that money, they try to make it as hard to access as possible. Whether it's like, hey, um, my housemate or my partner or a relative that I trust, I'm going to give you this money per month to pop in a separate bank account. And if I need that money, I need to ask you first. You just increase that friction of being able to access that money, whether it's a separate bank account where you've got no card for, you've deleted the app for it, or the only way to access that money is maybe physically call the bank and go, look, I need some cash from this account. So you can also increase that friction for accessing that pool of money. And in a way, superannuation is a little bit like that. It does increase a lot of friction. You can't access it until you're 60.
Yeah. You've mentioned a lot of really solid behavior change strategies there, like, for example, increasing the friction towards a temptation. You could possibly also decrease friction towards something that's healthy, but it might be like making it easy to spend your money on healthy stuff. Somewhat boring, but healthy stuff. And also the idea of external accountability as well. I think I'm a big believer in that. I'm running an accountability community as well. And I think one of the big levers that it pulls is basically like saying, okay, I've got this task that is important, for example, saving for my future, but it's uncomfortable in that I need to make a change. I need to make sacrifices. And so it's very easily kind of offloaded as a hospital pass to myself 5 years from now. It's like Joey, like 5 years from now, can take care of it. He'd be wiser and he'll be more disciplined and all this stuff. But the external accountability kind of brings that forward. And basically, like, let's say Sam and I are accountability buddies. Sam might say, like, so why are you spending money on these like Fabergé eggs or something like that?
You do need to add elements of reward to it.
Yes.
One of the things I do enjoy about the barefoot investor approach is at the start of the journey, he does encourage you to do like regular eating out milestones. So
Yep.
if you're like, we just need to get an idea of our budget, you can be like, we're going to go out for dinner once a week, fairly nice restaurant, or whatever you like to do to treat yourself. But while we're doing this dinner or while we're treating ourselves, we're adding stuff into the spreadsheet. I still do this once a month with my partner. I might order pizzas and go, look, we're having a really nice night in, but the only condition is we have to get the spreadsheet up to date, the budget spreadsheet up to date.
Got it. I guess the way I'd probably do it is I'd do the hard thing first and reward myself with the night out. So like I can be fully present with whomever I'm with. I guess when you combine the two, do you feel like it dilutes the experience at all, or does it actually just make it easier to do the hard thing?
I think it makes it easier because I also have like once a week in my calendar, I've got a reminder to update the budget spreadsheet. A couple of weeks of that will lapse. And it
Yep,
was like, okay, we haven't updated our numbers for a month. Let's get it all back on track.
got it. And do you forego the dinner for that month until it's up to date, or not that strict?
Now we tend to do it once a month. It's like I've got the weekly reminder, but I didn't do it this Sunday. So it just might be a point. I'm like, oh, it's been 2 or 3 weeks. We haven't updated it in a while. I'll get back on top of that.
Yeah. So this could be a potentially thorny area, so feel free to pass on it. I think one challenge that probably comes up quite a lot in personal finance is when you have a partner and you might not necessarily be completely aligned on financial goals or tactical parts of the plan. Have you found any of that stuff coming up? Any tips to manage those potential conflicts? Because money can be like a pretty tough thing to talk about sometimes.
Yeah, so my partner and I, we do have a slightly different mindset when it comes to money. Because my partner grew up in Sydney with a relatively wealthy family background. Dad's an accountant at one of the big accounting firms and has always had decent financial literacy kind of just embedded through the whole growing up process. So our how much energy we spend towards money is vastly different because for me it's been a huge stressor for my life. Managing it now takes a lot more of my thinking process. Whereas for my partner, they've generally always had a good emergency buffer. They've never really overspent. All of their spare cash went into their offset before we moved in together. I feel quite lucky in that regard. My partner has a fairly autonomous type of approach to thinking about money, and it hasn't really caused a lot of stress for them or for us either. I've heard stories of couples that have vastly different viewpoints of money, and I feel like as part of the approach to dating, we should be able to have these types of conversations earlier on. It's a real taboo type of subject sometimes for some people to bring up, or it's really sensitive. It's just like any other type of value that we hold as people. If your values don't match as part of that early dating process, you should be able to pick up on any differences and go, look, is this a compromise I'm okay with? Or is this a compromise that is like, look, there's no long-term prospects with the relationship. So I feel like we should be able to normalize being able to have some of these conversations earlier on. And like some of the questions I put forward to people who are trying to assess money values in people, it's like, hey, if you're meeting someone and you're asking the conversation, imagine you're financially independent and able to retire within the next year or two. What does your life now look like? If you don't have to work for money, what would you do? But that's like a fairly easy, approachable type of question to kind of understand if people would like the idea of working towards financial independence. But like also you're not really critiquing or trying to draw up any failures. You're just trying to see if there's any common goals that you potentially could work towards. But yeah, like asking someone on a first date, like how much money do you have saved in your emergency fund, is not exactly the most
Romantic.
yes. I think there are ways to ask that, maybe at like the second or third kind of date, where it's like, hey, if you lost your job tomorrow, how long would your emergency fund last? So like if
Mm.
you ask more like hypothetical questions like that, rather than like how much money do you have?
I like the way you're basically seeding the idea that if we're going to have a long-term connection, money is going to be, it's not going to be an issue that we're going to skirt around. It's going to be something that we're proactive about and we're going to talk about it. I like the idea from the first or second date. You say, like, hey, tell me about what you do if money wasn't any kind of concern, their perspective around money, but it tells you around about their perspective around life as well. Like, what are the things that they value? Because that can often come
Mm.
out when you're not concerned about money. I really like that. One thing I thought was interesting was I think this is possibly because I'm just like a naturally, I don't have a high level of trust for people generally. And I feel like if someone was asking me on a second or third date, like, what would you do if, how long would your emergency fund last? I'd be thinking to myself, is this person like sizing me up as some kind of mark to grift me or something like that? But that could just be me.
Because I have that financial advice background, I often tell people, I have these types of conversations when I'm just meeting people for the first time.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know this is kind of a personal question. It's just really whenever I catch up with an old colleague who I'm like, oh, I know you were made redundant. I hope you've got a good emergency fund and you could ride this wave out for 6 months. I got a mortgage, I'm a single income household, and the family's depending on me, and I don't actually have that much of a buffer. Then it's like, I really feel for you. It's really hard right now. Or being able to just have that conversation casually with a bunch of colleagues or people that I'm just meeting at events, I don't feel like I'm trying to grift them per se. It's just like, hey, is this causing you stress right now? And I'm like, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that you're trying to grift someone. I guess I was just trying to say the way I perceive it is like, is someone trying to size me up for a grift or for a mark or something like that? The way you're approaching it is, I think it's a very holistic approach to money in that a lot of, like in our society, like a capitalist society, it's quite difficult to disentangle our emotions from money. Like, for example, if we lose our job, sure, there's a lot of other aspects to the job aside from the money. There could be like the sense of community that you might have had in that job or like the sense of purpose. But also, like, if you're not financially independent, you are probably doing it to help pay the bills and stuff, and to acknowledge that, hey, you've lost a point of stability in your life. How do you feel about the future? And what resources do you have? I think that's a fairly relevant question to ask. And I think emotionally intelligent as well. So I guess we had a fairly deep conversation about breaking that cycle of, okay, well, I've got the money. Let's talk about maybe the other end. This is one that I'm probably experience a lot more, which is that I hold quite tightly to money. And I sometimes wear my frugality as a badge. And I think sometimes it costs me both in terms of opportunities where I could be outsourcing something that I'm not particularly good at, or something that doesn't have to be done by me, or just enjoying life a bit more, right? And I have come across some people that are fairly well off, and they have this thing called a spending coach. Here's how to spin a better story around money so that you can experience money as a tool rather than the central part of your life. I don't think I'm as bad as like saying it's a central part of my life, but I think I could stretch myself a little bit more in terms of the money as a tool type of story. Do you have any advice for someone like me that's struggling with this type of challenge?
Look, I grew up with that poverty mindset. Even today, if I see discounted groceries, I'll still have a look and try to fill my freezer full of discounted mints, to do big batch of cooking and a bunch of things like that. There was a chicken salad at a butcher that was on sale because it'd been sitting there all day, half price or whatever. I buy it and eat it the next day, and it gives me food poisoning. So there's that story of that frugal mindset and trying to save money on food, because that's what I grew up with. I always grew up with the idea of everything I put in my basket, I have to keep a mental track of how much it's going to cost because I've only got X amount in my bank account right now and I need to try and maximize buying enough food for the next week. So that does tend to train you to always look out for bargains and discounts and all of that. But sometimes if you're stuck in that type of mindset, you can cause yourself more health issues like accidentally food poisoning, which is not great in the grand scheme of things. As I was walking through the supermarket the other day, picked up milk that was 50% off, and I'm like, oh, we could use this. And my partner's like, look, that's too much milk that we can use in like 2 days. And I'm like, yeah, but milk's fine after the use by because it's just a guideline anyway. And he's like, look, we can afford the more expensive milk. And
Yeah.
it's like, ah, oh yes, we can. But I still struggle with that mindset. And, it can be hard to break out of that mindset. And sometimes you do need a buddy to remind you to go, hey, look, you can afford the nice things in life. You don't have to buy the reduced milk or whatnot.
Yeah. All through that story, I was kind of wondering, but what's wrong with that? What's wrong with discovering long life milk? I'm a vegan, so I drink soy milk. Discovering the long life milk is usually about half the price or something like the normal milk, and it just keeps longer. It's like, why would I buy the fresh milk?
Well, yeah, I went through a phase of drinking mostly powdered milk because every time we had milk in the fridge, we wouldn't use it and we'd have to throw
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I was just using it for morning coffees at the time.
Mm.
And so I wasn't using a huge amount. And it's like, yeah, after a little while, you don't really notice the taste difference. I have had vegan housemates before and always kept a stock of bonsai on hand. Bonsai is the slightly more expensive long life milk, but I think it is one of those milk alternatives that does perform well under heat because it's designed to be used in a cafe, to be stretched and all of that. It is one of the better alternative milks I find for cooking with, for making vegan based recipes. It's like I've made a really good vegan queso cheese sauce, faux cheese sauce, nutritional yeast and bonsai, and had that on nachos, and it's pretty tasty. But it does cost a little more. But having that on stock is also nice.
We've gone from the very strategic mindsets to what kind of milk you can use in the cheese on your nachos. So it's fantastic, Sam. Where can people learn a bit more about you and your work?
I tend to hang out mostly on Reddit these days. I'm a moderator of a finance forum called Oz Henry. It's like Oz Finance, but the Henry stands for High Earner, Not Rich Yet. So it's meant to be a community where we don't judge people for earning lots of money and not having any idea of what to do with money. So I'm Bug Hunter Sam on Reddit. If anyone posts a new question on that community, I've created an auto mod response which has that wealth building chart that we've talked about and a few other resources for learning more about finances.
Wonderful. And if people want to connect with you, is it best for them to go into Reddit and send you a DM, or do you prefer not to be direct?
My DMs are generally open, but there's also LinkedIn,
Yep.
Sam Connolly on LinkedIn. Also my email, sam@thebughunter.com.au, is also a way to reach out.
Well, it's been wonderful having you on, Sam. Do you have any final words or ask for our audience before we wrap up?
Final sentiments is that money doesn't have to be scary or stressful, and it doesn't matter if you feel behind when compared to a whole bunch of other peers. Your own journey through this whole life is completely unique, and you can make improvements regardless of stage on life to help reduce those stresses over time.